A small girl with perfect pitch stands in the shadows of a Louisiana chapel, her ear catching something wrong in the forged papers. Church bells toll as patrollers storm through the wooden doors. A young woman steps between the chains and her heart and kisses him full on the mouth before God and everyone. But in the chaos that follows, tiny fingers trace a broken seal, and a child's voice calls out the lie that could save a life. Thunder rolls across the cotton fields. A family Bible falls open to reveal faded ink in the margins, words that could shatter chains or bring the whip down harder. The courthouse steps wait. The truth burns like a brand. When the seal is pressed and the crowd falls silent, will an 8-year-old girl's gift for hearing lies be enough to free them all, or will that kiss in the chapel become the last thing they remember before the chains close forever? Dawn painted the kitchen windows gold. Steam rose from Aunt Viney's kettle like morning prayers. Tansy sorted through Miss Laurette's ribbon box, her small fingers finding each color by touch. Blue for mourning, red for fever, green for luck that never came, the midwife's voice carried from the hall. That clerk's got the fanciest hand in the parish. Loops his B like he's writing for the governor himself. Tansy's fingers stilled on a blue ribbon. She hummed under her breath, catching the rhythm of the midwife's words. Her ear could hold a tune forever, note perfect. Mama used to say God gave her that gift before he took everything else away. Child, tie that ribbon and get the whorehound steeping. Aunt Viney's wooden spoon never stopped stirring. Miss Laurette's head's pounding something fierce this morning. Tansy wound the blue ribbon around her wrist and pulled it tight. The kitchen door stood half open to the herb garden. Willow bark soaked in a tin cup. Whorehound leaves hung drying on twine. Everything in its place, everything with purpose. The midwife kept talking. Seen that clerk's seal on every paper worth signing. Parish business, bills of sale, travel passes. Got that pretty loop and Latin words underneath. Real fancy. Tansy traced a letter, B, in the flour scattered on the table. Loop up, curve down, another bump. She watched the flower catch the lamplight like tiny stars. Then she blew it away like a secret. The kitchen door slammed. Asa Pike's boots struck the hall like hammer blows. Israel! His voice cut through the morning quiet. Get yourself here, boy. Tansy pressed herself against the pantry wall. Through the crack, she watched Israel step into the kitchen. Tall as a doorframe, hands gentle enough to calm spooked horses. The kind of man who hummed while he worked, low and steady like distant thunder. Asa pulled a folded paper from his coat. Got you a night pass. Clark signed it himself yesterday. You're to take the bay mare down to the Thibodeau landing. Pick up seed for the north field. Israel took the paper, careful-like. His fingers were rough from field work, but they held that pass gentle as a newborn bird. Yes, sir, Mr. Pike. Mind your back by first light. Patroller's been touchy lately. From her hiding spot, Tansy hummed the rhythm the midwife had used. Clerk signed it himself, but the words felt wrong in her mouth, like a song with a note out of place. Asa's boots tramped toward the door. Israel held the pass up to the lamp. The wax seal caught the light muddy brown instead of the deep red the midwife had mentioned, and the impression looked soft somehow, blurred. Tansy pressed her eye closer to the crack. The seal's loop looked broken, incomplete, like someone had tried to copy something they'd only seen once. Israel folded the pass and tucked it in his shirt, but Tansy saw how his jaw tightened, how his eyes lingered on that broken seal. By dusk, the bell called them to the country chapel. The wooden church squatted in a grove of live oaks, their Spanish moss hanging like tattered prayer shawls. Lamplight leaked through gaps in the board walls. Families clustered on rough-hewn pews, their voices joining in the evening hymn. Tansy sat beside Aunt Viney in the colored section. Her blue ribbon caught the lamplight each time she turned the hymnal pages. Miss Laurette and Miss Celine occupied the Bouvet family pew near the front, their black mourning dresses severe against the pale wood. Israel stood at the back with the other field hands. His white shirt was clean and pressed. The pass crinkled in his pocket when he moved. Reverend Bell raised his arms. Let us sing Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, verse 1. The congregation's voices rose like smoke. Tansy sang along, her perfect pitch weaving through the harmony. But her eyes stayed fixed on Israel. The chapel door banged open. 3 patrollers stepped inside, their boots loud on the pine floor. The singing faltered. voices dropping one by one until only the organ wheezed in the sudden quiet. "We're looking for a boy named Israel," the lead patroller called. "Got word about a disputed pass." Miss Lorette's back went rigid. Miss Celine turned in her pew, her young face pale as moonlight. The patroller's eyes found Israel. "You, come forward." Israel's hand moved to his shirt pocket. The paper rustled like autumn leaves. "Let me see that pass, boy." Miss Lorette leaned close to her daughter. Her whisper carried in the chapel silence. "Don't you dare kiss him, Celine. Don't you dare make this worse." But Miss Celine was already rising from her pew. Her skirts rustled as she stepped into the aisle. 18 years old and tender as spring grass, but her chin lifted like she was facing down the devil himself. She walked straight to Israel. The patroller reached for his arm, but Miss Celine was faster. She stood on her toes and kissed him full on the mouth, right there in front of God and everyone. The hymn broke in the rafters like startled birds. "Celine!" Miss Lorette's voice cracked like a whip, but the damage was done. The kiss hung in the air between them, scandalous, impossible, witnessed by every soul in that chapel. The patroller's grip tightened on Israel's wrist. "Well now, that complicates things considerable." Tansy's small voice cut through the shocked murmurs. "That seal's wrong." Every head turned toward the colored section. Tansy stood on the pew, her blue ribbon bright in the lamplight. "I said that seal's wrong," she repeated, louder this time. "The loop's broken and the Latin underneath don't sound right." The patroller squinted at her. "What you know about seals, little girl?" Tansy climbed down from the pew and walked to the front of the chapel. Her bare feet whispered on the pine boards. She began to hum, a low, precise rhythm that filled the space. "Clerk's got a fancy hand," she said, matching the cadence exactly. "Loops his B like he's writing for the governor himself. Got that pretty loop and Latin words underneath." She pointed at the pass in Israel's hand. "That there seal's got a broken loop, and the Latin sounds like parish clericus's when it ought to be parochial clericus." Reverend Bell's organ wheezed to a stop. The silence stretched tight as wire. The patroller unfolded the pass and held it to the lamplight. His frown deepened. "How you know so much about Clark talk, girl?" "Got an ear for it," Tansy said simply. "Notes, words, rhythms, they stick." Miss Lorette rose from her pew like judgment itself. Her black dress rustled with fury. "Enough. This spectacle ends now." She pointed a shaking finger at Israel. "You'll be sold at dawn, sold south where they don't tolerate this kind of unseemly attachment." The words fell like stones in still water. Miss Celine's face went white. Israel's shoulders sagged. But Tansy kept humming that rhythm, holding onto the truth like her blue ribbon held onto her wrist. The word dawn struck Celine like a bell that would not stop ringing. Night fell hard. Dogs barked beyond the cane fields, their voices carrying on the thick Louisiana air. Tansy followed the path to Aunt Viney's cabin, her feet finding every root and stone by memory. Inside, herb steam curled up from the kettle. Celine sat hunched on a three-legged stool, her fine dress muddy at the hem. Her hands shook as she reached for the cup of willow bark tea. "That was a brave thing you did," Aunt Viney said, stirring honey into another cup. "Foolish, but brave. Mama will never forgive me." Celine's voice was small as a child's. "She'll sell him for certain now." Tansy settled cross-legged on the floor, her blue ribbon bright in the firelight. "Maybe not." Both women looked at her. "Mr. Bouvet used to tuck notes in holy places," Tansy said. "Seen him do it many a time. Pressed flowers in his Bible, wrote in the margins. Always said God's book was the safest place for important things." Aunt Viney's wooden spoon went still. "What kind of notes?" "Don't rightly know, but I remember a quilt scrap from when I was little. Had Liber stitched real faint-like on the binding. Latin word, means free or book." Celine leaned forward. "You remember which quilt? The one with psalm numbers. 68, I think. He sets the solitary and families." The steam curled into a question mark over the kettle. Rain began slow at first on the roof shakes, then harder, drumming against the windows with growing urgency. By midnight, the storm had turned violent. Water seeped under doors and through loose shingles. Aunt Viney packed her medicines in oilcloth, while Tansy gathered the precious quilts. "We'll have to move to higher ground," Viney said. "Doctor's back room's got shelves up near the ceiling." They splashed through ankle-deep water to the main house. "Doctor!" Tanhill's medical supplies lined the walls, jars of bitter tonics, rolls of bandages, and books bound in cracked leather. Miss Lorette was already there, directing the servants to move furniture and ledgers to the upper shelves. Her hair had come loose from its pins, making her look younger and more fragile. "Tansy," she said sharply, "help move those Bibles to the high shelf. The binding's too valuable to let water damage." Tansy climbed onto a chair and reached for the family Bible, thick as her forearm and bound in midnight blue leather. As she lifted it, the book fell open in her hands. There, in the margin beside Psalm 68-6, she saw lines written in faded ink. "Mr." Beauvais' careful hand, forming words that made her breath catch. "Upon my death, the man Israel shall be manumitted by the widow's consent, or the daughter's sworn oath, being of good character and faithful service. Let no man gainsay what love and justice have joined. Signed this day in God's sight, Henri Beauvais." Tansy's hands trembled. The rain drummed harder against the windows. "Miss Lorette," she whispered, "you need to see this." The older woman looked up from her ledgers, water dripping from her dark hair. Her eyes met Tansy's across the crowded room, and for the first time since the chapel, something like hope flickered in the lamplight. Steam curled from Dr. Tanhill's kettle as Miss Lorette read her husband's words. Her lips moved silently, tracing each letter of the faded ink. Outside, the storm raged against the shutters like an angry spirit. "My Henri wrote this," she breathed. "His hand, his seal." Celine pressed close to read over her mother's shoulder. "Does it mean what I think it means? Manumission?" Miss Lorette said slowly. "Legal freedom, if—" She looked at her daughter with something between sorrow and wonder. "If the widow consents or the daughter swears an oath." Tansy watched from the corner, her blue ribbon twisted tight around her finger. The Bible lay open like a doorway between what was and what might be. "You could free him, Mama," Celine said. "Papa wanted it. He planned for this." Miss Lorette's hands shook as she touched the margin. "Your father was always too soft-hearted, too trusting," but her voice had lost its sharp edge. The rage that had carried her through the chapel scene seemed to leak away like rainwater through old boards. "Doctor." Tanhill emerged from his supply closet with an armload of medicine bottles. Storms getting worse, rivers rising fast. Through the window, they could see lanterns bobbing near the levee. Men shouted warnings about high water and loose logs. The ferry landing had disappeared under brown foam. "Consider it," Celine said quietly. "Please, Mama." Papa saw something good in Israel, something worth protecting. Miss Lorette closed the Bible carefully, her fingers lingering on the binding. If I were to consider it, there must be no more scandal, no more public displays. I promise. And the proof must be verified. That passage examined by proper authorities." Celine nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mama, whatever you need." Miss Lorette looked toward the window, where dawn was still hours away. "I'll think on it, privately, but if there's any more trouble—" She didn't finish the threat. She didn't need to. Outside, a dog howled long and mournful. The sound carried on the storm wind like a prayer for mercy that might never come. Down at the quarters, Asa Pike stood in his doorway watching the storm. Rain soaked through his hat and coat, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on the main house, where lamplight still flickered in the doctor's room. He pulled a ledger book from under his coat and thumbed through the wet pages. Names and numbers filled every line: debts, sales, bills of lading. Some entries were written twice in different hands. Some dates had been changed. A patroller splashed up the path, his horse blowing hard. "Asa, you seen that boy Israel? Chained up in the stable." Asa's voice was flat. "Wagon comes at first light to take him to the river buyer. Heard tell there's questions about that pass. Little girl saying the seal ain't right." Asa's jaw worked. "Girl's got too much mouth. Always has." He lifted a match from his pocket and struck it against the doorframe. The flame flared bright, casting shadows on the ledger pages. For a moment, it looked like he might set the whole book burning. "Any lying Bible pages turn up," he said slowly. "They'll burn too. You can count on that." The match went out, but the river wind rose. Thunder rolled across the cane fields. In the stable, Israel lay chained to a wooden post. The shackles had rubbed his wrists raw, but he didn't struggle. Instead, he hummed, low under his breath, the same hymn from chapel, steady as a heartbeat. Through the gaps in the stable walls, he could see the main house. Lamplight moved from window to window as folks worked to save what they could from the flood. He thought about Miss Celine's kiss, the taste of courage on her lips, the way she'd stepped between him and the patrollers without hesitation. Tomorrow they'd load him in a wagon, take him downriver to buyers who cared nothing for chapel kisses or brave young women or Bibles with secrets in their margins. But tonight, he hummed that hymn and held on to hope like a drowning man holds on to driftwood. Because sometimes, just sometimes, Providence moved in mysterious ways. And 8-year-old girls with perfect pitch could hear the truth in forged seals and broken loops. The storm passed before dawn, leaving puddles that caught the first light like scattered mirrors. Tansy woke in Aunt Viney's cabin to the sound of wagon wheels on wet gravel. She pressed her face to the window. Asa Pike sat hunched on the driver's seat, his coat dark with rain. Behind him, Israel sat chained in the wagon bed, his white shirt torn and muddy. "No," Tansy whispered. Too soon. She grabbed her blue ribbon and ran barefoot across the yard. Aunt Viney called after her, but Tansy didn't stop. Her feet splashed through puddles as she chased the wagon down the lane. "Wait," she called. "You got to wait." Asa pulled the reins. The horses snorted and stamped, eager to be moving again. "Get back, girl," he growled. "This ain't your concern." But Tansy had already reached the wagon. She stood on her toes to see Israel's face. His eyes were calm, but she could see the fear underneath. "The Bible page," she whispered. "Miss Lorette's seen it. Your freedom paper." Israel's chains clinked as he leaned closer. "What you talking about, little one?" "Psalm 68. Mr. Beauvais wrote it right there in the margin. Says you're to be free if Miss Lorette or Miss Celine says so." Asa's whip cracked in the air above Tansy's head. "I said get back," but the damage was done. Israel's eyes had gone bright, with something that might have been hope. The wagon lurched forward. Tansy watched it disappear around the bend, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she turned and ran back to the house. She found Miss Celine in the parlor, still wearing yesterday's muddy dress. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "They took him," Tansy panted. "Asa took him in the wagon." Celine's face crumpled. "Mama said she needed time to think. I thought we had until evening." "We still got the Bible page," Tansy said. "That's proof, ain't it?" "Proof isn't enough if he's already sold downriver." Tansy chewed her lower lip. Something tickled the back of her memory, something about the hymn from last night. She began to hum under her breath, letting the melody work through her mind. "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land." The tune felt familiar, but not from chapel. From somewhere else, somewhere secret. "Miss Celine," she said slowly, "you remember Reverend Bell changing the verses last night, right when the patrollers came in?" Maybe. Everything happened so fast." Tansy closed her eyes and reached for the memory. Reverend Bell's voice, steady and calm, even with patrollers in his chapel. But he'd sung different words, older words. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. No, that wasn't right either. The words had been about a road, a door, something hidden. She opened her eyes. "I need to get to the chapel, to the basement." "Tansy." "What?" Reverend Bell was giving directions. "In the hymn. I know it sounds crazy, but preachers used to do that." "Hide maps in songs." Celine stared at her. "Maps to where?" "Safe places, doors that open for runaways. Maybe somewhere that knows about freedom papers." The chapel basement smelled of old wood and mice. Celine held the lantern while Tansy searched through trunks full of hymnals and quilts. Spiderwebs caught the light like silver thread. "Here," Tansy said, pulling out a quilt with faded blue binding. "This is the one with the writing." She traced her finger along the edge until she found it tiny stitches, forming letters so small they almost disappeared into the fabric. Psalm 68, door, oak. "Ferry, Liber, Latin again," Celine whispered. Tansy nodded. "Mr. Beauvais taught some of the house folks to read. Said knowledge was the only thing they couldn't take away." She spread the quilt on the floor and studied the pattern. At first it looked random blue squares scattered across white cloth. But as her eyes adjusted, she began to see a design. A road. A house with a door marked in darker thread. A stand of trees near water. "It's a map," she breathed. Celine held the lantern closer. "Those blue squares, they're marking something." Tansy hummed the hymn again, letting the melody guide her eyes across the quilt. Each verse seemed to match a section of the pattern. "When I tread the verge of Jordan, the water crossing, death of death and hell's destruction, the safe house beyond." She looked up at Celine, excitement bright in her eyes. "It leads to the Quaker settlement, 20 miles north. They got lawyers there, folks who know about freedom papers." A door slammed overhead. Heavy boots crossed the chapel floor. "Someone's coming," Celine whispered. They rolled up the quilt and grabbed the lantern. The basement stairs creaked as they climbed toward the main floor. Asa Pike stood in the aisle between the pews. His coat dripped rainwater onto the pine boards. His face was dark with rage. "Thought I might find you here," he said. "Girl's been filling your head with nonsense, I reckon." Celine stepped protectively in front of Tansy. "What do you want, Mr. Pike?" "Want to know what you two been digging around for? What you found in that old Bible?" His hand moved to the pistol at his belt. The metal caught the lantern light. "Nothing that concerns you," Celine said, but her voice shook. Asa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Everything on this plantation concerns me, girl. I keep the books. I know every debt, every sale, every paper." He took a step closer. "And I know what your daddy wrote in that Bible. Been worrying about it for years." Tansy pressed herself against Celine's back. The quilt felt heavy in her arms. "Mr. Beauvais is dead," Asa continued. "Been dead 2 years. And dead men's wishes don't trump living men's profits." "That paper's legal," Celine said, written in his own hand. "Paper's just paper. Can burn quick enough." The chapel door banged open. Miss Lorette swept in, her black dress rustling with purpose. Behind her came Dr. Tanhill and Reverend Bell. "Mr. Pike," Miss Lorette said coldly, "you're in God's house. Lower your voice." Asa's hand moved away from his pistol, but his eyes stayed hard. "Ma'am, just making sure your daughter understands the situation. The situation is that you've sold a man without my permission. Israel's wagon left 2 hours early. Bills of sale been signed for weeks. Nothing irregular about it." Miss Lorette's lips pressed into a thin line. "Show me those bills. There, back at the office. Then we'll all go look at them. Together." Asa's jaw worked. Through the chapel windows, they could see storm clouds building again on the horizon. "Storm's coming," he said. "River's still high. Dangerous to be traveling. But Reverend..." Bell was already moving toward the door. "I'll hitch up the church wagon. We can be at the landing in an hour if we hurry." Tansy clutched the quilt tighter. In her mind, she could hear the hymn playing steady as a heartbeat, sure as a compass needle pointing north. The wagon chase began as the second storm broke. Rain lashed the road, turning dust to thick mud that sucked at the wheels. Miss Lorette rode beside Reverend Bell, her knuckles white as she gripped the seat. Tansy and Celine huddled in the back under a canvas tarp. The quilt lay spread between them, its hidden map catching drops of water that leaked through the cloth. "The ferry landing," Tansy said, pointing to a cluster of blue stitches. "If we can get there before Asa's boat leaves." Lightning split the sky. In the white glare, they saw another wagon ahead, Asa's, with its distinctive red wheels. Israel's white shirt was barely visible in the driving rain. "There," Celine called. "Reverend." Bell snapped the reins. Their horses lunged forward, closing the gap yard by yard. The road curved toward the river. Through the storm, they could see the ferry landing a wooden dock stretching into brown water. A steamboat waited at the far end, smoke rising from its stack. Asa's wagon reached the dock first. Men in oilcloth coats hurried to unload Israel's chains. Money changed hands in the rain. "Too late," Miss Lorette said, her voice barely audible over the storm. But Tansy was already moving. She rolled up the quilt and tucked it under her arm. As soon as their wagon stopped, she jumped down and ran toward the water. "Tansy!" Celine called after her. Rain soaked through Tansy's dress in seconds. The dockboards were slick with water and moss. But she didn't slow down. Her bare feet found purchase where shoes would have slipped. She could see Israel now, hands chained behind his back. The river buyer, a thin man in a beaver hat, was counting bills with wet fingers. "Wait!" Tansy shouted. "That sale ain't legal." The men turned. Asa's face went dark when he saw her. "Girl, you get back. That man's already free." Tansy unrolled the quilt, holding it open in the rain. The blue stitches gleamed like secrets finally told. "Got the map right here, and the Bible page that proves it." Israel's eyes met hers across the dock. In that moment, she saw him understand. The hymn had been a message, the quilt was proof, and an 8-year-old girl with perfect pitch was the key to it all. Thunder rolled across the river. The steamboat's whistle screamed through the storm, and in the chaos that followed, Providence began to work its quiet miracles. The river buyer stepped back from Israel, his money clutched in wet hands. "What's this about stolen papers?" "Nothing," Asa said quickly. "Girls touched in the head, always making up stories." "But Reverend..." Bell was already climbing onto the dock, the family Bible clutched against his chest. Miss Laurette and Celine followed, their dark dresses whipping in the storm wind. "She's telling the truth," Miss Laurette called over the thunder. "My husband wrote a manumission clause, legal and binding." The river buyer looked between them, calculating. Stolen property was dangerous business, the kind that drew federal attention. "Let me see this paper," he said. Reverend Bell opened the Bible carefully, shielding the pages from the rain. The faded ink in the margin looked fragile as butterfly wings. Israel strained against his chains, trying to see. The ferry rocked in the current, its whistle growing more urgent. Henri Beauvais, the buyer read slowly, "Witnessed and sealed." He looked up at Miss Laurette. "This your husband's hand?" "It is." "And you're the widow mentioned here?" Miss Laurette's voice caught. "I am." The buyer closed the Bible with a snap. "Then you got a legal problem, friend," he told Asa. "Can't sell what's already been freed." "That paper's 2 years old," Asa protested. "Just ink on a page. Ink that says, 'Upon the widow's consent,' or 'daughter's oath.'" The buyer's eyes were cold. "You got consent, ma'am?" Miss Laurette looked at her daughter. At Tansy with her water-soaked quilt, at Israel chained like an animal on the dock. The storm raged around them. Lightning turned the river white. In the distance, church bells tolled the noon hour early. "I do," she said. Her voice carried over the wind like a bell that would not be silenced. "I give my consent freely." The chains fell away from Israel's wrists with a sound like breaking glass. But Asa Pike was already reaching for his pistol, his face twisted with rage and fear. The ledger book under his coat held too many secrets to let one freed slave destroy them all. "Nobody moves," he snarled. "This ain't over." The steamboat's whistle shrieked again, and in the distance, more riders approached through the storm, their purpose unclear, their arrival ominous as thunder. Asa's pistol gleamed wet in the storm light. Rain ran from its barrel like tears from a metal cheek. Behind him, the steamboat's paddle wheel churned brown water, ready to carry its cargo downriver to markets that asked no questions. "Put that weapon away," Miss Laurette commanded, but her voice shook. "Can't do that, ma'am." Asa's eyes darted between Israel and the approaching riders. Too much at stake now. Tansy pressed herself against the dock's railing, the quilt heavy with rainwater in her arms. Through the storm, she could make out 3 horsemen splashing through the mud. Their leader wore the brass buttons of a parish official. "The clerk?" she whispered. "It's Clerk Dupré." Israel rubbed his freed wrists, the chain marks still red on his dark skin. "What's he want here?" "Reverend." Bell stepped forward, the Bible still clutched to his chest. "Mr. Pike, there's been no crime here. The man's freed legal and proper." "Legal?" Asa laughed, wild-eyed. "Nothing's legal about forged seals and fake papers." The riders reached the dock. Alphonse Dupré swung down from his horse, water streaming from his black coat. He was younger than Tansy expected, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and careful eyes. "Sheriff sent word about disputed papers," he called over the storm. "Something about false seals?" Tansy's heart hammered. This was the moment. Truth or lies, freedom or chains. She stepped forward. "Mr. Dupré, you're the parish clerk?" "I am, child. Got a question about your seal, the one with the fancy loop." Dupré's eyes sharpened. He pulled a leather case from his saddlebag and opened it carefully. Inside lay his official seal, brass and wood, with a deep red wax stick. "You mean this?" Tansy began to hum, low and precise. The rhythm she'd memorized from the midwife's words. "Loops his B like he's writing for the governor himself." She pointed at Asa. That man's got papers with your seal on them. But the loop's broken, and the Latin's wrong. Dupré looked at Asa with new attention. Show me these papers. Asa's hand tightened on his pistol. Papers are back at the plantation office. Then let's go fetch them. Dupré's voice carried quiet authority. All of us. Together. The river buyer cleared his throat. If there's questions about ownership, I'll be heading back to New Orleans. Don't need this kind of trouble. He climbed aboard the steamboat, leaving Israel standing free on the dock. The whistle screamed one last time before the boat churned away into the storm. Asa watched his money disappear down the river. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. Mount up, Dupré commanded. We'll settle this at the courthouse where it's legal and proper. But, as they turned toward the horses, Tansey caught a glimpse of Asa's left hand. It held a different pistol, smaller, hidden in his coat sleeve, the kind of gun that made no sound when it fired. Look out, she screamed. Israel threw himself sideways. The silent bullet sparked off the dock's iron railing. Asa cursed and raised the gun again. Miss Celine moved without thinking. She grabbed a boat hook from the pier and swung it hard at Asa's arm. The hidden pistol spun away into the dark water. That's enough! Dupré's voice cut through the chaos. His main pistol was drawn and steady. Mr. Pike, you're under arrest for assault and attempted murder. Asa slumped against a dock post, rain running down his face like tears. His coat fell open, revealing the ledger book he'd kept pressed against his chest. What's in that book? Dupré asked. Tansey stepped closer. Bills of sale, I reckon. Names and prices. Her perfect memory caught something else, but some of the wax seals got the wrong color, brown instead of red. Dupré holstered his pistol and reached for the ledger. Asa tried to pull it away, but his fight was gone. The book fell open to pages covered with neat columns, names, dates, prices, and stamped at the bottom of each page, a seal with a broken loop. These are forgeries, Dupré said grimly. Every last one. He flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. Some of these people been sold twice. Different buyers, different dates. Israel looked over his shoulder. That's young Thomas from the Miller place, and Sarah from Benton's land. Both got sold last month. According to this, they got sold again 2 weeks later. Dupré's voice was cold. To different buyers. For different prices. Miss Laurette pressed close to see. That's impossible. Unless someone's been forging papers and keeping the profits. Dupré closed the ledger with a snap. Taking money from buyers and selling the same people over and over. Tansey understood now. That's why he wanted Israel gone so quick, before anybody could check the real seal against the fake one. Thunder crashed overhead. In the sudden white light, they could see more riders approaching a sheriff's posse, drawn by reports of gunfire. Asa Pike sat in the mud, his empire of forged papers crumbling around him. The storm had washed away more than just dust from the roads. By afternoon, the rain had stopped. The courthouse square steamed in the sudden heat, and crowds gathered to hear what folks were calling the trial of the forged seals. Tansey sat on the courthouse steps, her blue ribbon bright against the grey stone. The quilt lay spread beside her, its hidden map no longer secret. Israel stood with Miss Celine, both of them still muddy from the morning's chaos. Clerk Dupré had set up his desk on the courthouse porch. His real seal lay beside stacks of paper, Asa's ledger, the family Bible, and a growing pile of witness statements. The evidence is clear, he announced to the crowd. Mr. Pike has been forging official documents for over 2 years, selling the same people multiple times and keeping the profits. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some folks looked shocked. Others nodded like they'd suspected all along. As for the matter of Israel's freedom, Dupré continued, the manumission clause is legal and binding. He lifted the Bible and opened it to Psalm 68. In the afternoon light, Mr. Bouvet's faded writing looked strong and clear. However, Dupré said, the law requires either widow's consent or a sworn oath from the daughter. Miss Laurette stood slowly. Her black dress was wrinkled and water-stained, but her back was straight. I am Laurette Bouvet, widow of Henri Bouvet, she said in a voice that carried to the back of the square, and I give my consent freely and gladly to my husband's wishes. She turned to Israel, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You served my family with honor. You protected my daughter when no one else would. By law and conscience, you are free. Applause rippled through the crowd. But Dupré held up his hand for quiet. Miss Celine, do you wish to add your oath to your mother's consent? Celine stepped forward. Her young face was pale but determined. She took Israel's hand in front of everyone. No shame now, no scandal. I do, she said. I swear before God and these witnesses that Israel is free by my father's wish and my own choice. Dupré pressed his seal into warm red wax. The impression was perfect, loop complete. Latin correct. Let it be entered in the parish record, he said. Israel is hereby manumitted and free. The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Others grumbled. A few walked away, shaking their heads. But on the courthouse steps, 4 unlikely allies sat together in the afternoon sun. A freed man, a brave young woman, a widow who'd found her conscience, and an 8-year-old girl whose perfect pitch had heard the truth in a broken seal. Justice and mercy had met at last. 3 evenings later, lamps flickered on the Beauvais front porch. The storm damage had been cleared away, broken boards mended, mud swept clean, order restored to the careful chaos of plantation life. But some things had changed forever. Israel sat on the porch steps, no longer a field hand, but something new, a free man choosing to stay. His white shirt was clean and pressed. On his finger gleamed a gold ring that caught the lamplight. Papa's ring, Celine said softly, settling beside him. Mama found it in his desk drawer this morning. Miss Laurette emerged from the house, carrying a wooden box. Her black mourning dress had been replaced by grey silk, still proper, but softer somehow. Henri sized this ring for his son, she said, her voice gentle with memory. But he told me once it was meant for a son by oath, not blood. She handed the box to Israel. Inside, on faded velvet, lay legal papers, manumission documents, a wage contract, and a deed to 10 acres of our bottom land. Your wedding gift, Miss Laurette said simply. Reverend Bell climbed the porch steps, his black coat dusty from the ride. Behind him came neighbors, some curious, some skeptical, all drawn by the unlikely nature of the evening's purpose. Aunt Viney had arranged chairs in a careful circle. Tansy sat cross-legged on the floor, her blue ribbon now tied around the family Bible. The book lay open to Psalm 68, Mr. Beauvais' faded writing visible in the lamplight. Unusual circumstances, Reverend Bell said, opening his prayer book. But love makes its own laws. He looked at Israel and Celine. You've chosen a hard path. The world won't always understand. Israel's hand found Celine's. Been choosing hard paths all my life, Reverend. This one's got hope at the end. Then, let's begin. The ceremony was simple, words spoken in the warm evening air. Vows made before witnesses who might whisper but couldn't deny what they'd seen. When Reverend Bell asked for rings, Celine slipped her mother's wedding band onto Israel's finger. The gold clicked once against the Bible's leather binding true, then still. What God has joined, Reverend Bell said, let no man put asunder. The crowd was quiet. Even the skeptics seemed moved by the simple dignity of it. Old Abram began to hum low and wordless. Aunt Viney joined him, then others. The melody rose like incense in the summer air. Tansy stood and began to sing the words, Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Her perfect pitch wove through the harmony, clear and true as church bells. One by one, every voice joined field hands and house servants, neighbors and strangers, all united in the ancient song. When the hymn ended, Miss Laurette stepped forward. Her hands shook slightly as she addressed the crowd. I have something to say, she announced, about this household, about the way things will be. She unfolded, a paper her handwriting, fresh ink on good paper. From this day forward, no person on this land will be sold without their consent. All work will be paid with fair wages. Children will be taught to read, regardless of color. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, others shocked. Furthermore, Miss Laurette continued, any family separated by past sales may reunite here if they choose. This will be a place of healing, not breaking. She looked directly at Tansy. And special recognition goes to a young girl whose sharp ears and braver heart saved us all from lies and corruption. Tansy felt her cheeks burn. She wasn't used to such attention. Her gift for truth served justice, Miss Laurette said. May she always use it wisely. The crowd began to disperse as full darkness fell. Neighbors mounted their horses and headed home, carrying stories that would spread through the parish like ripples on water. But the family, this new, unlikely family, remained on the porch. Israel and Celine sat close together, her head on his shoulder. Miss Laurette had settled in her rocking chair, with mending in her lap. Aunt Viney dozed in the corner, and Tansy curled up on the steps with the Bible in her arms, its blue ribbon soft between her fingers. "Tell me the story again," she said sleepily. "About the seal that saved us." Miss Laurette's needlework caught the lamplight. "Which part?" "All of it, from the beginning." So they told it, taking turns, adding details, weaving the events into something that would be remembered. How a little girl's perfect pitch heard lies in forged papers. How a young woman's courage sparked a chain of providence. How truth and mercy met on courthouse steps and made all things new. Crickets sang in the garden, fireflies danced over the cotton fields, and on the porch of a Louisiana plantation, love had indeed made its own laws. The lamp burned low as the story ended. One by one, they drifted towards sleep. The free man and his bride, the widow with her changed heart, the servant who'd become family. But Tansy remained awake a little longer, listening to the night sounds and holding tight to the Bible that had saved them all. Her blue ribbon fluttered in the evening breeze, no longer a mark of mourning but a symbol of hope, bright against the darkness, soft as a whispered prayer, strong as the truth that had set them free. At first light, they returned to the courthouse to make the final entries, but the real ending had already written itself in lamplight and hymn songs, in courage kissed and mercy freely given,